Hi, everyone. I hope you are doing well. So, we're back. We're going to talk about a man named Fred Grabbe and what horrific thing he did to end up in a story that I am telling you guys. So, let's get into it. The Grabbe family was wealthy by small town standards. They were easily one of the richest families in Marshall, Illinois, a tiny farming town just 10 miles west of the Indiana border. Most of their wealth came from Charlotte Grabbe's inheritance from her parents. Both Charlotte and her husband Fred were extremely hard workers who spent long hours farming their soybean and corn fields, but their life together was far from perfect. The couple had two children, Jeff and Jenny, who usually took Charlotte's side when there were problems between the parents. Fred and Charlotte had been married for 23 years, filled with violence. So much so that they had divorced once and remarried. Why do people do that? If you're going to get divorced, you got divorced for a reason, okay? It's not like you just fell out of love. No, there's a reason why you can't live your life with this person no more, okay? I hear so many times people are like, oh, they got divorced and they got remarried just to get re-divorced. And I'm like, that's a lot of fucking extra shit you shouldn't have had done. If you want to be with somebody, especially if you've already married them once before, don't remarry them. Just be together, right? You're just going to save a lot of time and headache when you get sick of each other again anyways. So, back to the story, sorry. But the second marriage looked to be headed toward divorce as well, like I said. Fred was a huge man standing at 6'4", while Charlotte was petite. During their heated arguments, Fred had no problem using his fists on his tiny wife or his son Jeff. Things had gotten so bad that Charlotte had instructed Jeff and Jenny to come look for her if she hadn't returned to the house by the end of each workday. At 42 years old, Fred was also a serial philanderer. I don't know what the fuck that is. Philanderer? I don't know what that is. And had a fascination with younger women, usually having a few girlfriends on the side at any given time. In 1981, Fred was dating a 24-year-old, curly-haired, blonde bartender named Vicki McAllister. After learning of Fred's latest affair, Charlotte was devastated and filed for divorce. Fred moved out of the family home into a small cabin on the edge of the family's property. Jeff and his wife then moved into the main family house with Charlotte. It wasn't long after Fred moved into the cabin that Charlotte filed battery charges against him. He had assaulted her when she went to the cabin to take some furniture back to the main house. Just after sundown on July 21st, 1981, Charlotte had not returned to the house after work, and Jeff and Jenny knew something was wrong. She had gone out to the soybean field on her tractor, but when they went looking for her, they found the tractor parked inside a machine shed. Her lunchbox was still resting on the front tire. Jenny immediately returned home and reported her mother missing to the Clark County Sheriff. When questioned by the sheriff, Fred admitted they had quarreled, but said that the last time he saw her, she was driving her car toward the interstate highway. Of course he would. Of course he would. To throw them off, right? Don't look at me. Go look at the highway over there. Days later, Charlotte's car was found across the state border in Terre Haute, Indiana, just 16 miles away. Police searched her vehicle and found no blood or signs of foul play, but beneath the seat was a loaded handgun. Contrary to Fred's story, a friend of Charlotte's came forward and told the sheriff she saw Fred driving his truck toward Terre Haute with someone following in Charlotte's car. Someone other than Charlotte. There we go. Just setting it all up. The people that fucking know her are going to know that's not Charlotte, obviously. You know what I'm saying? They're going to report that shit. Ugh. I can't. The witness claimed the person driving Charlotte's car was a young blonde woman with curly hair. Sounds like that bartender he had an affair with, right? Investigators found that Charlotte kept a safe deposit box at the local bank. Inside the box, they found notes that she had placed there just 10 days before she went missing. Sounds like she knew something was fucking coming, dude. In those notes, she wrote that she believed Fred had been stealing farm equipment, and she had doubts that she would live through the divorce. In addition, she wrote that she was afraid of Fred and his business partner, Dale Kessler. The sheriff questioned Dale Kessler, who claimed Fred had been with him on the evening Charlotte went missing. Of course his friend's gonna fucking cover for him until they find fucking proof of something. Ugh, speculation, you know. At Jeff and Jenny's request, the sheriff brought Fred and Vicky Allister before a grand jury, but both refused to talk, invoking their Fifth Amendment rights. Jenny even asked her father to take a lie detector test to prove he didn't kill her mother, but he refused. Of course he refused. Oh my god, dude. Ugh. Charlotte's case went cold for 3 years despite Jenny and her husband offering a $1,000 reward for information. They later raised it to $10,000, then again to $25,000, but still no one came forward. Eventually, Jenny hired a private investigator, Charles Pearson. Pearson decided to follow the clue of the curly-haired blonde driving Charlotte's car. Smart. Because obviously the police are incompetent at this point, right? Just saying. Clearly, Pearson believed the woman driving the vehicle was Vicky McAllister, and he wanted to talk to her. Fred and Vicky had since broken up, and she was now living in West Terre Haute, Indiana. Pearson knew that Vicky liked to do two things: drink beer and play pool. He started hanging out in bars in the area and eventually met her, and they became friendly. When Pearson finally admitted who he was and why he had befriended her, she couldn't help but spill the beans. He said the information poured out of her like there was something she desperately needed to get off of her chest. She had been holding a secret inside, and it was eating her alive. Which could be why she was drinking so much. She was trying to cover that shit up, right? She was more than willing to come clean. McAllister admitted to Pearson that she was the one driving Charlotte's car that day. Big fucking surprise. But that was just the beginning. Next, she described the gruesome details of what happened that night and the following day. Vicky McAllister's story made her physically ill each time she told it. Nevertheless, the story would eventually be told to authorities and, later, to two juries. McAllister recalled that she and Fred Grabbe were in the machine shed that day to get some 55-gallon metal barrels for farm work. As they were loading the barrels into his truck, they heard Charlotte's tractor. Fred told Vicky to hide behind another tractor inside the shed. Fred went outside the shed to meet Charlotte, where they had a very heated argument. The argument escalated as they came back inside the shed, but eventually Fred couldn't control his rage and began strangling her. Using his bare hands, he choked her until she was almost unconscious. He then released his grip to let her regain consciousness, and then choked her again. He eventually repeated this over and over again until he strangled his wife to death. Once Charlotte was dead, he sodomized her lifeless body while Vicky watched. Are you serious? Dude, no wonder she was, man, on either. Oh my god, dude, that's horrible. That is absolutely horrible. That poor, I have nothing. I have nothing. That literally made me speechless. Fred then grabbed a grease gun from the shed and he filled all of Charlotte's orifices with grease. It got worse. It got worse, guys. It got worse. He crumpled her body into one of the 55-gallon barrels and loaded the barrel into the back of his pickup truck. Grabbe instructed Vicky to drive Charlotte's green Ford LTD that was parked outside and follow him as he drove his truck across the state line into Indiana. That night, they dumped Charlotte's car outside a bar in Terre Haute and drove back to Grabbe's farm, then parked on the bank of the Wabash River. Grabbe took the barrel out of his truck and placed it near a maple tree, where he poured diesel fuel into the barrel until it covered Charlotte's body. He then lit it on fire. Fred and Vicky sat on the riverbank while the barrel burned. The diesel fuel and the grease inside her body burned slowly all night long. It just gets worse, guys. The following morning, they heard the search party approaching, so they put out the fire and loaded the drum back onto Fred's truck, with Charlotte's charred body still inside. They then headed back to Vicky's home. At sunset that night, they returned to the river, put the barrel in the same spot, and set it ablaze again. Again, it burned all night. In the morning, Fred rolled the barrel into the river. The only body part remaining was Charlotte's skull. He grabbed the skull, turned to Vicky, said, "This will make good fish bait," and then threw it into the river. This guy is sick, guys. This guy is sick. Oh my God. Vicky's confession helped, but it simply wasn't enough. Prosecutors needed some sort of physical evidence to charge Fred Grabbe. With no body, barrel, or murder weapon, investigators needed something besides Vicky McAllister's word against Fred's. Officially, Charlotte's case was still just a missing person. The new sheriff in Clark County, Dan Crumrin, was curious if the maple tree, which still stood above the burn site, could somehow be used. Crumrin asked the University of Illinois for help, and they sent a plant biologist, Eugene Heimlich, and an organic chemist, Donald Dickerson. During the natural cycle of a tree's life, the seasons will cause a tree to grow in the spring and summer, then go dormant in the winter. This process each year creates the familiar ring in the trunk and branches of every tree. A ring in the tree's branch will show that year's growth. Diesel fuel is highly toxic to a tree. If it doesn't kill it, then it will, at the very least, hamper its growth. Heimlich and Dickerson took samples from the branches of the maple tree. Their findings concluded that 3 rings deep, meaning 3 years ago, the tree's growth was much thinner. The tree had gone through some sort of stress the summer that Charlotte had gone missing. They then shredded the samples into sawdust, which Dickerson analyzed using a gas chromatograph. Well, close enough. Mass spectrometer. Whatever. A mass spectrometer is a device that identifies the components of a sample, even in very tiny amounts. In their analysis, they found the presence of hydrocarbons found in diesel products. There were a total of 5 branches tested. The 2 branches located on the side of the tree that the barrel was on showed the hydrocarbons. The other 3 on the opposite side did not. This forensic evidence was enough to convict Fred Grabbe. One of the prosecutors in the trial was Robert Egan of Chicago. Egan had been the prosecutor for the trial of John Wayne Gacy, a serial killer convicted for the murders of 33 young men in 1980. Fred Grabbe was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, the story was far from over. During the trial, Fred had the support of his latest girlfriend, Barbara Graham, a twice-divorced mother of 3 from a nearby town. Fred had purchased her a mink coat that she wore in the courthouse during the trial to torment the family members. A few weeks after Grabbe's conviction, he was being held in the Clark County jail when Barbara Graham attempted to break him out. She showed up at the jail and told Deputy Sheriff Mike Paulson that she wanted to give Fred a love note. When Paulson opened the door, she fired 5 shots, one hitting the deputy in the leg. She hovered over him and said, "Don't make me kill you." Graham's attempt, however, was unsuccessful. She was sentenced to 16 years in prison for that crime. The judge that sentenced Grabbe to prison was convinced that Fred had somehow planned the breakout attempt from behind bars. Just 2 months later, with Fred still in prison, both the Grabbe home and the nearby home belonging to Fred's son Jeff burned to the ground. Fire marshals determined that both fires were intentionally set. Investigators suspected that Fred had something to do with it from prison, but he was already serving a life sentence. They had no way to prove his involvement. During Fred's imprisonment, his lawyers filed an appeal of his verdict and got his first conviction overturned on a technicality. By this time, Vicki McAllister was living another life under another name, but returned to Clark County to testify against Fred again. Just a month before the second trial, Fred's son Jeff, who had testified at his first trial, vanished. He was on a business trip in California when all his family members lost contact with him. By the time of the trial date, Jeff was nowhere to be found. The judge allowed his wife Cindy to testify in his absence. Despite lacking Jeff's testimony, Fred was once again convicted a second time and sentenced to 75 years in prison. 1 month after the trial, Jeff's body was found floating in the water at Seal Beach in California. 3 bullet holes riddled his body, and an anchor was tied around him to keep the body down. To this day, Fred denies having anything to do with his son's murder. Vicki McAllister received the $25,000 reward that Jenny and her husband had offered, and she relocated under yet another assumed name. She still lives in fear that Fred will somehow find her. In June 2022, 83-year-old Fred Grabbe was released on parole. He served only 37 years of his sentence. And yet another strange twist to this family story. Years later in 2014, Fred's grandson, Adam Everett Livix, was indicted on weapons and immigration charges in Netanya, Israel. He was suspected of impersonating a Navy SEAL and plotting bombing attacks on the Dome of the Rock, an iconic mosaic in Israel. Livix was diagnosed as being psychotic and unfit to stand trial. He was held in a mental institution in Israel for a year before he was released back to the U.S., where he faced charges of stealing farm equipment. And on that note, guys, that's the end of the story. So, what do you guys think? Like, this guy's sick. I've heard some stories, right? We know about, like, the most heard of serial killers, but this guy, and honestly, he's not a serial killer because he only killed his, well, I guarantee he had something to do with that other one too. So there's that, you know. Anyways, I would like to know what you guys think. What do you guys think about Fred Grabbe? Have you heard of him before? I've not. So anyways, I hope you guys liked today's video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe. And as always, I appreciate you guys so much for watching, subscribing, and liking my videos. Until the next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye.